here's how the form of butter that you add into cookies affects them. So we're going to make 4 batches of chocolate chip cookies with 4 different forms of butter and leave the rest exactly the same so that we can really see the differences. First, we're testing softened butter, which is a classic ingredient in chocolate chip cookies, melted liquid butter, browned liquid butter, and brown butter that has been cooled down and stirred to get a creamy consistency. Softened butter is the most commonly used form of butter in chocolate chip cookies. I had to use an electric mixer for this because it's quite difficult to beat softened butter until creamy by hand. With softened butter, the mixture gets really light and airy because you're able to incorporate a lot of air into the butter and sugar, and the cookie dough turned out super creamy and soft. To make the liquid butter batch, I melted the butter down to this liquidy consistency, effectively separating fat from the milk, protein, and moisture. But unlike brown butter, the moisture is still in the butter and it doesn't evaporate. Since the butter is melted, I didn't need an electric mixer to incorporate the butter into the sugar. Just a wire whisk is fine, which makes this a really easy version of a chocolate chip cookie dough. The cookie dough does turn out a little gloopy because the butter is melted, but after you let it sit for a minute, it becomes perfectly scoopable. This cookie dough looks much darker than the first cookie dough because there's not a lot of air being incorporated in this process. Next, I made cookie dough with liquid brown butter. Butter can be anywhere between 80 and 85% fat depending on its quality, about 1% for the milk protein. So you're losing approximately 14 to 19% of moisture while browning butter. To make the cookie dough, it's a very similar process to the melted butter cookie dough, but it turned out darker and had a more crumbly, greasy texture. Last up is browned softened butter. It behaved very similarly to regular softened butter because you could really whip a lot of air into the butter and sugar. The cookie dough turned out very light in color, very creamy, but much stiffer than softened butter cookie dough. When they're side to side, you could really see the difference between the textures and the colors of the cookie dough. They got baked in the oven at the same temperature for the exact same amount of time, and the cookies could not look more different from each other. And all of the cookie dough got chilled equally in the fridge for 30 minutes before baking. The softened butter cookie spread the most, had the least amount of browning, and was also the thinnest because of the spreading. It had slightly crisp edges, but not as crisp as any of the other ones. A very soft, almost undercooked center. It had a classic clean chocolate chip cookie flavor without many other flavor notes going on. The melted butter had the second most amount of spreading, a very dark brown exterior, and super crisp edges. It also has the second most gooey, soft center. It is the darkest cookie with the most browning along the edges and the crispiest edges. It had a more complex toasted buttery flavor than the softened butter. Not quite browned butter, more of a caramelized cookie flavor. Next is the browned melted butter, and this cookie spread the least amount, making it the thickest cookie. It is golden brown all over, has a very crisp exterior, not just around the edges, but the whole outside. The center is soft and chewy, but not quite as soft as the softened and melted butter, but chewier than the softened and melted butter. It had a brown butter flavor along with a toasty caramelized cookie flavor. Lastly, the browned softened butter spread a little more than the liquid browned butter. It's very lightly brown and had a very dry, crisp, almost shortbread-like exterior. The center is still soft and chewy, but not quite as soft as the browned liquid butter. The flavor is almost like a brown butter shortbread cookie with a soft center. The brown butter flavor did not come through this cookie as much as it came through the melted brown butter cookie. It still has a brown butter flavor, but it's a little more muted. There are a few conclusions that I made from this comparison. The more air I added into the butter and sugar mixture during the creaming process, the more the cookies spread. Brown butter yields a much more crisp exterior and a more chewy center. Softened and regular liquid butter make a softer interior of a cookie because of the extra moisture in the butter. Which type of cookie do you prefer? Check out the caption to see how I ranked them and why.